Today I'm sharing tips on drawing realistic soft fur on this adorable orange tabby with colored pencil and pan pastels. For this project, I am working on the smooth side of gray Canson Me10's paper. I've got it taped down with some acid-free pH-neutral art tape. This was my first time using this specific tape. I really liked it. It stuck super well. So well that I do recommend using a hair dryer to heat that up when you do remove the tape, if you use that one, and I'll put a link to the one that I got in the video description. But if you heat it up, it will remove no problem without tearing the paper. Always remember though, when you do remove it, pull it away from the artwork, not towards it. We don't want to risk it tearing anything. So I've used phthalo blue and phthalo green to get that basic teal background, and now I'm adding some black right over that. And I just want it to be kind of blotchy, a little painterly here. And I'm using my soft tools to apply this. Now onto the cat. I'm using some white and burnt sienna, a little bit of red iron oxide when I get to the more red tones. In my reference photo, this cat had a more yellow tone. I've gone a little bit more orangey red on mine. Now, as I lay these pan pastels, they do not need to be perfect. I don't need the perfect color. I don't need anything perfect detail. Well, you're not really going to get a lot of detail with the pan pastels, but I don't need anything perfect. This is just covering the paper so that when I come on top with the colored pencils, it saves a ton of time. This is an 8x10, and if I had done this just with the pencils to get the same amount of color saturation and detail, it would have taken probably 3-4 times as long as what it did because I did this base layer with the pan pastels. So I'm just blocking in about where I want my lights and darks. As I blend this, I'm trying to keep the orange colors away from the teal background because I don't want to make a muddy mess in that orange tone. Once I get everything filled in, I'll go along the edges and soften that up a bit. I've mixed black in with my red iron oxide, and this gives me a really dark brown color. I'm using that to get my darkest portions in here. Again, don't worry about details. This is just our base layer. We're going to be putting all the details on top with the colored pencil later. You don't need to push very hard at all with these soft tools. Use a very, very light hand, and you also don't want to cake the pan pastel onto the paper. You don't need very much. It's so pigmented. A little bit goes a very long way. Just to give you an idea, I have had this pack of 20 since around 2017 or so, and I have not run out yet. I'm just getting to the point where I may replace the white soon, but I use these a lot, and I've not had to replace any. So a little bit really goes a long way with how pigmented they are. That is really all I need for the background. So I've used my Spectrafix, and I keep that in a fine mist sprayer. Do multiple light layers. That is going to be your best bet. I do one big heavy layer because I was doing this during our Patreon members live stream. So to save time, I did do one big heavy layer. The risk there is that you might end up with heavy droplets spinning out, and I might have to blend over it. It's not the end of the world. It's something you can definitely fix. But I did go ahead and mist that with my Spectrafix, and now the colored pencils are going to stick on top of it really well. Now the thing with the Spectrafix, it is a fixative, but it's not going to seal it to the point where it wouldn't smudge. If I run my hand across this, it is certainly going to smudge. And that's why I've got what you see here, that cardboard. It has glassine. Now, glassine is a product that is acid-free. You can use it in between your artwork when you're storing it, like if you store it in a storage box or just have everything stacked up, or even for shipping. Acid-free, so totally safe, so totally archival to be touching the artwork. But in this case, I have it taped to the back side of an old Amazon box, and that allows me to move it around as I'm working. The other great thing with glassine is that the pan pastels or pencils, nothing will stick to it. So it's not making a huge mess. This keeps the oils from my skin off the work and it keeps my hands clean so I'm not getting smudge marks all over them. Now I'm going to start with the ear here. I'm using a lot of purple. So this is going to be one of my best tips I can give you if you are drawing an animal with orange fur. So, and even not just orange, it could be a golden retriever that has kind of that yellowy orange tone, the tan reddish tones, a corgi, in this case the cat, a tiger. Anytime I use these orange tones, my favorite colors are going to be sanguine from Faber-Castell Polychromos. That's kind of my, like, it's just a good orange tone without being too orange, and purple. Purple is going to be your go-to color. That is the Derwent Light Fast Purple is the absolute best. And that is the color you want to go to when you're shading any of your orange tones. Purples or magentas, those should be your go-to. Don't jump to using black to add shadows. Now that's not to say I'm not going to use black in this, I absolutely am. But most of my shadows are being done first with the purple, and then I'll save the black for the deepest portions of the shadow. This is going to create a lot more depth. And even if I'm looking at a reference photo and there is no purple, if I used a color matching tool, no purple anyway, where it doesn't matter if I'm using orange tones. So again, a tiger, a golden retriever, an orange tabby cat, I am absolutely pulling purple into that for my shadows. It will just add so much depth to your work. And it doesn't even have to be this. It could be a clownfish. I'm going to use purple first and then come back through with the black for the deepest portions. Now, this is an absolute perfect example of ugly stages in art. This looks like I painted it with my feet. Well, one foot. One of my feet is currently broken, so I couldn't paint it with both my feet. But, well, maybe it does look like I painted it with my broken feet. It is that bad. It isn't going to stay there. Don't let that scare you. When you get scared and you look at your work and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I can't pull this one off, don't throw it away. Don't start over. As long as your foundation drawing was correct, keep working on it, keep building until it looks good, because these ugly stages are a part of the process. Now, as much as possible, I want to focus on one area before I move on. So I don't want to do both ears and then be jumping around thinking, okay, I need this color in 15 different locations. Let's put that color everywhere it goes. Your end result is probably not going to be very good. Instead, what we want to do is focus on one little area, 1 or 2 square inches at a time, until they're mostly finished. Now, in this case, I am going to be using OMS, or odorless mineral spirits. It's a type of paint thinner that is going to help smooth out some of my pencil strokes with the colored pencil. Now, that works well over the PanPastels as long as you've applied Spectrafix first. If you skip that stage, if you applied PanPastels and went straight into colored pencil, when you work with the odorless mineral spirits, that can create a bit of a muddy mess. If you've put a decent amount of 1 or 2 layers or light coats of your Spectrafix down, then the OMS works just fine. I don't use a lot on my brush when I blend out, especially when working on cans and Mi-10s, because that paper absorbs so much, but just a little bit will blend really nicely. If you do blend with odorless mineral spirits, you want to make sure that you let it dry all the way before you go over it with your pencils. So that is one of the reasons that on this specific piece, you will see me jumping around a little bit more often, where I worked on the ear and then I came down here and worked on the face or the eye and then back to the ear. It's because I'm waiting for one area to dry with the OMS. Now, do not use a hairdryer with the OMS. That stuff's flammable. We do not want to heat that up. Now, that area needs to dry. So I'm going to go ahead and work over here. So I'm kind of, it seems like I'm going against my own tip to focus on one small area at a time. But again, the reason I've got to do that is if one area is wet from blending with OMS, I just need to wait. Now, of course, that would be a great time for you to step out, go on a little walk, take a break, but this was, again, during our Patreon members live stream, so that wasn't an option. I have to do a little bit more jumping around than I normally might. using some black for the darker areas here. And there's a hint of the stripes there. There's also a hint of detail in the eye. So here's another big tip. When you're working with a subject where one part is really cast in shadow, like we've got on this cat's face, don't try to make the eye that's in shadow have the same brightness and the same color as the eye that's in light. That ends up looking very odd. Leave it in shadow. If you zoom in on the reference photo, we can tell that there's a bit of detail. I can see some light and dark, but there's no that like nice reddish orange color. We don't have any of that on the eye that's in shadow. Very, very little is over there. Also, don't try to put a bright highlight like you would on the side that is in the light. That would look very weird on that darker eye. But one of the reasons that I will often choose a reference photo is because of that really nice, strong lighting where you've got bright light on one side and deep shadows on the other. I love that when I'm doing paintings. But don't try to let your brain take over and say, well, we should be able to see this area more in light. Leave it in the shadow, leave it dark. Leave those edges soft too. If those edges in the shadowed area just kind of blend and fade into the background, go ahead and let them stay that way. Don't feel like you have to come through and brighten things up that should be dark. Or add detail to something that should just be kind of muted and faded into the distance. Not pushing very hard with my pencils at this stage. If I push too hard too soon, it will make it so that I can't get many layers back over it. And as you'll see as we go through this, I am adding a lot of layers on this cat. So if I push too hard and I can't get more layers, that really limits what I'm able to accomplish. So by using a lighter hand, you want to push hard enough that the pencil strokes show, of course. I've seen people take that tip a little too literal and nothing is coming off the pencil because they're using such a light hand. So push hard enough that you can see what you're doing, but don't jam that pencil into the paper until you get to your final layers. So there is a time where we want to push harder with those pencils. So like clean edges, that dark line around the cat's eye, for example. I'm going to push harder to keep that nice crisp edge. Or final details where I'm burnishing to blend. But when you push too hard, burnishing is when we push really hard with the pencil, we're jamming it into the tooth of the paper. That gives us beautiful blending. So it's great for those final layers, but we don't want to do that too early because it really limits what we can do later on. Now here I'm essentially doing what is a glaze. I am taking sanguine and I am lightly going over a lot of this area. I'm going to blend that with odorless mineral spirits because I'm finding that this whole area was so light that my lighter pencils where I was drawing in the little bits of fur just wasn't showing up well. So by taking the sanguine, going over that whole area and then blending with OMS, it darkened it up really nicely. Another option would have been to come back through with my PanPastels and darken it with that, then spray it again with the SpectraFix and then go back on top with the pencils. You can work back and forth that way just fine. Now here's an area where I'm pushing a bit harder with the pencil. I'm using this sort of cream color. I think that one is called Light Flesh, and I wanted those edges nice and crisp. So I pushed quite a bit harder with my pencils, but I also knew I wasn't going to need to layer a lot over that edge. Same thing, doing what is essentially a glaze. I'm taking that sanguine and going over these light areas. And then I will blend that with odorless mineral spirits. That's the paintbrush you'll occasionally see me using. I do not have very much on that brush. I don't want that to be super wet or we will be waiting forever for it to dry on this paper. That's where I'm blending with the odorless mineral spirits. Now, when you're working on cans and Mi-Tens and you use odorless mineral spirits, it will make everything super, super dark, but don't worry, when it dries, it'll lighten right back up. Getting the hint of the stripes here. Are you enjoying this lesson? You can follow along with the real-time version drawing pencil stroke by pencil stroke over at patreon.com/Lachri. For as little as $6 a month, you get access to this and all of my over 400 long-form lessons. I've been teaching students just like you for over 25 years. I would love to help you take your artwork to the next level. I'm going to blend that with the odorless mineral spirits again. Again, if you did not use Spectrafix, I do not recommend using odorless mineral spirits. It almost gets pasty and kind of removes clumps of the previous layers of PanPastel. That Spectrafix is what makes this go as well as it's going for me here. One of the things that I like about Spectrafix, if you put it in light layers or apply it in very light layers using that fine mist sprayer, it doesn't really darken the work like other fixatives I've used. I do not like fixatives on pastels. That was always something that I fought with. It was a huge reason that I got to the point where I didn't like working with pastels at all. Years and years ago, I used to use them a lot, but I hated how dark they would get. I felt like I was constantly fighting that. You have to spray it or they kind of fall off the paper over the years, but it darkened everything up. So it was so frustrating. Spectrafix has been an absolute lifesaver. And while I have not gone back to working in pastel pencils, I do love it for charcoal. I use it for, obviously, the PanPastel. It works so well. Using purple again on those darker areas, and then I'm going back to black just for the very inside of some of those stripes. Now, that's not that the cat has black stripes. It's just that those striped areas are so in shadow. They're so dark. That's why we're adding the black there. But then I'm putting purple right back over it again. And this helps the black not to look too flat. You can really see how much I go back over different areas, adding fur, then glazing, tinting the color, and then going back and adding more fur. That is because I'm not pushing too hard. Canson Me 10s is great though anyway. It's got such good tooth that the pencils stick to it very, very well. Now sometimes that means that you end up with a slightly more rough, kind of grainy, gritty look than you would if you were on a watercolor paper, but it also really allows you to continuously layer. I apologize, my video camera has major issues with the white balance, so it keeps shifting color there. Now this area that I'm adding white, I'm using the Derwent Drawing Chinese White. That is a really thick lead. It is super opaque, very, very soft, so it just blends so nicely. And then of course went over it with the odorless mineral spirits, and you can really see how dark that patch is under his neck. That's going to lighten up a lot as it dries. It's not going to go straight to white because it does mix in with the previous colors I had there, but it is going to lighten up quite a bit. When drawing fur, you really want to watch the direction of the fur in that reference photo. It will change directions constantly, and one of the things that I see a lot of people do is they will make a few brush strokes or pencil strokes and think, wow, that looks like fur, it looks great, and then they keep making the same angle, the same length, the same everything everywhere, and the end result is something that looks very flat, very, very cartoonish. Really watch the direction of the fur on that photo. It changes directions constantly. You also want to make sure the fur is moving in sort of clumps and clusters. You don't want confetti looking fur where it's just random lines all over the place. It doesn't matter how many of those random lines all over the place you add in, it is never going to look realistic. Really look at how the fur will clump and cluster together. Now there, I've used white for the whiskers, and I'm going to use sanguine on the tips just to tone those down so they're not white from start to finish, and that makes it look like the whiskers have a bit of a highlight catching on the curve. Have you worked with PanPastels and colored pencils combined? If you did, let me know what you drew and how it came out. Did you love it? Taking a little bit of PanPastels and going over some of the white soft fur, just softening everything out a little bit. And that just makes him look a little bit more fluffy and less wiry. I will still put a few more little individual bits of fur over that. The PanPastel sticks really well to the colored pencil too, so you can go ahead and layer on top of it. Now when I'm finished with this, I do need to put another coat of Spectrafix over it though to make sure that everything stays sticking to the paper really well. those ugly stages like we had earlier, remember, just layer until it looks good. Keep going, but as you layer, make sure you're doing it with intent. What is it you're trying to change about that layer? What don't you like and what needs to change? Do your lights need to be a little bit lighter, your darks a little bit darker? Have something specific that you're trying to do. Maybe you needed more detail. Focus on what specifically you wanted to change within each of those layers as you keep building. If you just go into it and start throwing marks all over the place without a plan, it is apparent that you were throwing marks all over the place without a plan. So I showed you how to get great soft fur for this kitten, but what about for a bunny? Check out this video here.